why do we want to intelligently dismantle bad rules? Every rule comes with an associated cost. There is no such thing as a free rule. Hi folks, good afternoon to you, and it's a great pleasure to be back. If you saw my presentation for this group last year, that one was on productivity and behavioral prompts, the kind of smart cuts that help leaders to get more out of teams and get things done. And a very small section of that was on something quite close to my heart, which I call strategic rule breaking. And they've asked me to come back and do the entire presentation on undiluted rule breaking. So I rubbed my palms together and said, I would love to. It's something very close to my heart. I've actually written an entire book on how to break rules and how to do it intelligently. Now, when most people hear that, they worry, they get the sense of, well, are we talking about anarchy? And the answer to that is simply no. I'm actually married to someone who works for the regulator and worked in compliance all of her life. So I have a fairly deep understanding of both sides of the equation. Both what rules achieve and how the bad ones can get in our way. And you simply can't ask the question, are rules inherently good or bad? It isn't that simple. A rule is a human imposition upon our world. It's a human imposition upon a system. And it might do good things, or it might do bad things. So you get good tools, and you get bad tools, and you get rules that were entirely made by tools. The options are entirely open to you. And what we're looking at today is how bad tools get in the way of getting things done. Now, why? Well, because like you, I've come to love this place. My family and I have been here for 4 years now, and we chose to uproot our entire lives and come across the world and make this our home. And we want to see it succeed. We want to see energy and vitality and life on this island. And as I get to know people who are born here, they often tell me, well, that sounds like what I grew up with. The way Jersey perhaps used to be, a place of hope and optimism where things could be done, dreams could be dreamed, and there was always an intelligent way to get a thing done. So then the question is perhaps, what happened? We're looking at some 20 years worth of stagnation, of productivity standing exactly where it was, stopping where it was, of non-wage growth. So where have we perhaps gone wrong? What can be done about it? I think a big part of the answer comes down to what we're looking at here. Too many rules doing too much damage. And what we're going to look at today is the intelligent dismantling of the bad ones. Keep the good ones, get rid of the bad ones. What's an example of a good rule? Well, thou shalt not kill. We probably shouldn't tinker with that one. That's a good rule. We keep that one. We should probably abide by it. Even when ministers take away parking in central St Helier, we should still probably abide by it. But examples of silly rules abound, and I get told about these things as I go because it's become a bit of a theme for me. In addition to the book, I write on this theme quite often for the Jersey Evening Post. And folks get hold of me and they say, you should hear what happened to me. And it's things like, you're not allowed to sell pies on the left-hand side of a counter. You can only sell your pies on the right-hand side of a counter. I kid you not, that is a real example. I had a great one just last week, where a gentleman who's lived here all his life told me about upgrading a driveway. And he said all he wanted to do was to refurbish this driveway. And as he was looking at it from the outside, an idea dawned on him. He had a small wall right next to the entrance, and it was about yay high by about that long. Very small thing. And it occurred to him that if he demolished that wall and got it out of the way, he could double the entranceway to his home. And if he could do that, then he could get 2 cars in and out at the same time. Instead of doing that thing that you've quite likely done, playing a game of Tetris in traffic, where one comes out and holds everyone up and the other one goes in. And all he wanted to do was get rid of the city wall, and planning permission said, no, you can't. Now, wanting to be a good citizen, he said, well, why not? Don't I own this wall? This is my property, I own it outright. And they said, sir, it doesn't work that way. Right? What you have to do is to follow our processes and we'll see if you can go ahead. And he said, all right, walk me through the process. They said, you have to pay us several £100s to lodge an application. And he said, that's quite steep. And after that they said, well, the reality is we're probably going to say no after that. And he said, if you say no, do I get my several £100s back? And they said, no, sir, it doesn't work that way. So he said, all right, what is the next step? And they said, well, we're a little backed up at the moment, so once you've lodged the application, you're going to have to wait 6 months. And he said, but the truck is delivering the gravel on Monday. And they said, sir, you should have taken account for our systems. And this kept on until Monday morning rolls around. Eventually the truck arrives, and the guy backs over his wall and demolishes it. He gets out of the truck and he goes, oh my goodness, so I've broken your wall down. And he says, yes, and for that I'm going to give you a bonus. Thank you. And now, he told me the story and I said, listen, be honest with me. Was that one of those accidents that happened? And he says, you know what, if I'd thought of it, I would have done it on purpose. But he said, no, it was quite organic. The guy backed over my wall and the entire problem was solved. All I'm doing is just not putting it back up again. Now, we have incredible examples of silly rules that get in the way, that make things slower, that make things more expensive, that make it more difficult to do useful things. And we're after insights into that today. So, the rules versus the goals. Why do we want to intelligently dismantle bad rules? This is the heart and soul of it. Every rule comes with an associated cost. There is no such thing as a free rule. All rules have implications in cost terms. And the first and most obvious one is financially. If you introduce a new rule into a system, you must also introduce those who police the rule. You have to have human resources. They might have to have teams. They need the equipment and the resources to watch over those things. And the more rules you introduce, the more you have people watching the people who police the rules. So there is a financial cost to every new rule that you introduce. There is also a time cost involved. Every rule that you introduce along a system slows the thing down. Now, it may not be by a great deal viewed individually, but cumulatively over a system, when you add too many, you effectively cryogenically freeze outcomes. Things can't be done. And there are places in the world, I get the chance to speak for a lot of business audiences in particular, there are places in the world where these sorts of rules simply do not exist, and things are done quickly. The world doesn't break, people don't die, the outcome is simply heightened productivity. I yearn for that. I'd love to see more of that here. There are intelligent ways that we can do it. But the costs to rules go further than that. There are also cultural costs to having too many rules. For example, the attrition rate when it comes to talent. When you have people of great radical value, the go-getters, the ones with initiative who want to build and grow and accomplish and do, and they constantly come up against the idea, you may not. The go-getters eventually go and get somewhere else. And what happens over time is your attrition rate leads to a situation where only the rule obeyers, the obedient and the compliant, remain. And these tend to be the sort of people who will happily accept a paycheck and do the minimum requirement on their job description. Now that's fine, but you've lost all the radical value. You don't have the ones who are pushing and driving wonderful new things. That kind of energy that I'm told was very much a part of the Jersey spirit. So there are several more costs, but those are the main ones that we will focus on today. And each of them takes its toll on a culture over time. What do we gain by stripping them away? Well, realistically, the opposite of those things. Everything becomes quicker. Everything becomes cheaper. Everything becomes more dynamic and interesting, and the whole system comes to life. You have willingness to create and do new things, to experiment as an entrepreneur, to introduce new and fascinating things into Jersey because you can. You're encouraged to, and there are no rules stopping you. For a microcosm of this one, watch the sauna guy and everything that has been done to him. I mean, I take that one quite personally. I've never met him, but it blows my mind how many barriers have been put in his way. So, what do we do about that? Well, let's ask the question, why do we get stuck with bad rules in the first place? Some of the answers are fairly sinister, and some of them are innocuous. They're just human nature. All of them are interesting. And I invite you to consider if you're seeing this within your own team, within your own business, brand, organization, or within the nation at large. So these are the 9 things that add up and cause us to mutually paralyze one another. The first one, inherited thinking becomes invisible. I always like to give this example of modern schools following a similar setup and system to Industrial Revolution era factories. And there are eerie similarities between the two and how they work. Now, the reason for that is actually not sinister. It's quite honest, and even at the time it was good. What happened was, at the time of the Industrial Revolution, the thinking became, we have to adequately prepare people for employment. What is employment? It's working in a factory. So we will teach them in neat lines with a foreman at the front of the room. We'll blow the whistle at a certain time. You produce to set hours. You go home, you come back, you repeat. You become the right type of employee for that. Good goal. But the goal has disappeared. We do not work that way anymore. That is 150 years old. It's gone. But the thinking gets handed down from generation to generation. When we examine rules, like thou shalt not kill, we find good reasons for them. But unless someone picks apart why this was there in the first place, it just gets passed on. It's there because it's always been there. We do it because that's the way things have always been done. That's not good enough. Again, it's not to pick on schools. It's just to illustrate that the way it was done gets inherited and passed along, unless someone intelligently challenges the why behind it. That's what we need to do. The second reason we get stuck with this sort of thing is we think rules are safer. It just seems to make sense. If you have rules in place, you safeguard against harm. It's not always the case. And agile organizations will argue today that intelligent debate is safer than blind rules. The best example of this one is the study of NASA. Highly agile organizations study what happened at NASA because it went so wrong. Early on, they were an intelligent, agile, debating organization, and they were able to accomplish and to solve some phenomenal problems. Then something went wrong around the time of the Columbia disaster, and the clue is in the title. So what happened there, in very brief, is this thing takes off into space, and the engineers realize that it's venting foam. And they try to give this feedback up the chain of command. But the people higher up are thoroughly bureaucratic, and they go by the rules. And their own books and their own bureaucracy and their own procedure tells them that foam is a known quantity. We've seen vented foam before. Now, using human insight and intelligence and the desire to debate and to fight back and to be dissenting, the engineers say, it's too much foam. There's something different about what's happening today. And it became this almighty tussle between human intelligence versus bureaucracy. And the bureaucracy won. And the result was that they picked up the pieces of that rocket over a debris field that stretched over 5 separate US states. They did in fact find the bodies of the astronauts, but they had to identify them using DNA testing. Folks, our belief that the rules are safer is not always correct. It seems to be emerging that the more you can get intelligent people debating, the better your outcomes, including for safety. That's quite an interesting one. Here's the third thing that goes wrong. Massive overkill becomes standard operating procedure. A while back, I wrote about scaffolding in Jersey. Don't you love scaffolding in Jersey? I live not far from the half-day par beach, and I feel so sorry for those folks who've had scaffolding and the cover over their building for what, a year and a half now? I walked down by the coast one night and it was flapping in the breeze, and I thought, I don't know how you live like that. A gentleman from Jersey who's lived here all his life told me a true story. He said, I had to do repairs on a building, and it was important. I really needed to get this done. But it became mandatory that I put up the scaffolding. And I tried to argue back that this particular repair didn't need scaffolding. There was no call for it. And he was told that he had to do it, them's the breaks, those are the rules. The scaffolding cost 3 times the repair. And the outcome of that was he didn't do the repair because he couldn't afford it. That's done. That's unintelligent. That has to go. You can't have massive overkill becoming standard operating procedure for even the smallest things. What's happening there is the rules are leading and the goals are forfeit. You cannot live like that. Not if you want to accomplish things in your society. If we start to wonder, why does everything cost so much? Why is it all so slow? Perhaps we found the answer. Next one. There is endless incentive for scope creep. Now folks, I'm new here. I've been here for about 4 years, so I don't understand all the dynamics, but I think I'm starting to get some of the picture. Last week I had the most interesting conversation with a gentleman who was born here. And this is the guy who said to me, that's the old Jersey way, when it was hope and vitality and energy. And I said, if this is such a small island, and we don't want so much strangling us and holding us back, why do we accept it? What's going on here? And he says, I'll tell you what's going on here. It used to be the case that the government was unpaid. I went, I didn't know that. He says it used to be run by voluntary work by farmers and business people. And he says what happened then is because they knew what needed to be accomplished, those people came together and got it done. And they didn't invent silly rules that didn't need to be there. He says then what happened is we started to pay government. And he made a fascinating point. He says if you're going to do it, you should either go the idealistic route of paying nobody, or you should go the route of being a high-paying body so that you attract the best possible talent. And his opinion was we've gone mid-road in Jersey. We are neither attracting the idealistic input, nor are we attracting people who have been directors and CEOs. We're somewhere in between. And he says it gets worse than that. He says every single person who is at the mid-level has a financial incentive to introduce more rules. And I said, all right, you're going to have to explain that one to me. He says, imagine your classic tin pot dictator. His words, not mine. He says, you have a person whose salary band is determined by how many people are beneath him. So the more rules he can introduce and enforce, the more enforcers he has, the higher his salary. Now, folks, we may be getting closer to the problem here. And I think that's one that we need to look at perhaps more seriously. I have a suggestion for what I think might be done about that. I wonder what yours are. I'll run it by you later. Very quick version is this. I think we need to flip the incentive. I think the incentive needs to be how much can you enable? And we financially incentivize you to do that, not this. This is you are financially incentivized to punish us and we'll pay you a salary to do it. More salary the more you do it. Something wrong there, folks. Okay, what else goes wrong? Here's another one. Number 5, everyone's doing the same thinking. I've been putting together a little book for Penguin, it's the next one, called Wicked Smart. And it's all behavioral smart cuts, the sorts of things that we can do in teams and organizations that make things happen quicker. And I came across some wonderful research by a man named Matthew Syed, Rebel Ideas. Ever come across that one? This is his basic idea. He says, imagine that quadrant represents total problem space. What is problem space? Every problem that can be faced, every problem that can be solved, everything that might go wrong and all the potential solutions to it, everything you deal with in your problem-solving life. And he says, this is you. That's how much problem space you can cover as a single individual. And it's why almost all work today is done in teams. Ideally, you want your team to look something like that. Very diverse thinking, but unified in their purpose. You need the unity to begin with. Everyone's trying to solve the same problem. But within that, the parameter, you then say, how much diverse thinking and opinions and viewpoints can we get? Then we get creative debate. And it's not necessarily the most comfortable way to work. It's more fun working with your friends who agree with you on everything. And that's why this is what we actually. It is way more fun to work like that. Everyone thinks the same. They hire people who agree with them, they hire people who want to uphold the same rules, and that's how much problem space we end up taking up. Now, what is the downside to that? Well, here's the danger. You have a group of people who are all agreed on one thing, but are totally blind to the rest. And it might go like this. That tree has been there since the days of William the Conqueror. We cannot touch it. But in the rest of that problem space, people are shouting out, our economy needs freedom. But these people are not where they should be. And there is not enough dissent, and there is not enough debate. That just may be the heart and soul of what we're facing. Can we solve that? We might be able to change things. Key to this, if you yourself are heading up a team and hiring people, that feels more fun. It feels a lot worse to have dissenting views in your team, but you have less blind spots. More thinking gets done. Right, what else goes wrong? We mutually checkmate one another. Here's an example from Jersey. A friend of mine was working as a director, And he handed in his resignation with the company. He'd had enough, wants to go somewhere else. They told him, you've got to give us 6 months. Now, I've never heard of 6 months in my entire life. He's a fellow South African, and that caught him by surprise as well. It's 6 months. In South Africa, it's 1 month. In America, it's 2 weeks. Other places, France and so on, it goes to 1 to 2 months. So far as I can tell, we are unique in that one. Now, why is that the case? It's not an official rule, it's an unspoken one, it's a cultural rule. Why is it happening? Well, it's like this group does it because that group does it. That group's doing it because this group's doing it. If somebody resigns, you need 6 months for the other person to resign to come to you. So we are mutually checkmating each other with a silly rule. Someone has to go first to break this one. Someone has to go first in the interests of freedom. Number 7, our roles and silos fight back. Worst example of this one ever is Sony. You should have a unified narrative, the story you tell yourself about yourself. The larger you grow, the more bureaucracy and rules, the less that happens. Sony were perfectly positioned to become what iTunes, Apple iTunes, ultimately did. 10 years before iTunes got there, Sony was experimenting with downloadable digital music. They owned all the top names, Michael Jackson, Mariah Carey, and so on. They were known for innovation. They came up with the boombox, they came up with the Walkman. They should have been the ones who did this. They were starting to experiment with it. But the people in the vinyl department took one look at the people in the digital downloads experimental department and said, that's going to cost us our jobs. They fought them, they shut it down to the detriment of the group as a whole. Next thing that happens to us, and we're up to number 8 here, our dreamers and our optimizers go to war. Folks, you may have noticed that human beings come preloaded with different psychology. We have different ways of looking at the world. Some of us are shy, some are outgoing, some of us are adventurous, some are technically minded. We need all of it, but there are conflicts between these groups. And leadership is about understanding how to get the best out of everyone. Now, understanding these two groups, the dreamers and the optimizers, is key to innovation. If you want your business, your brand, to remain relevant, you have to get a handle on this one. So the dreamers, I love these people. These are the splashy ones. The ones who go, what a cool new idea. Can't we let's break that thing and make a new thing. Let's do amazing things. And they're not interested in processes and pipes and how it all fits together. They just want to do the cool stuff. You need them because you have to do the cool stuff. Then you get the optimizers who take over their ideas and make the ideas gradually better and better, more and more efficient. They make it work in ways that are remarkable. But the problem is, they also fall in love with what they've done, and they will not let go. Kodak, the classic example. The dreamers come up with film and they hand it over to the optimizers, and the optimizers make it better and better and better and better, and they will not let go. And when digital comes along, they laugh at it. It's a technology in its infancy, and they won't let go of the old thing, and they optimize their way off the edge of a cliff and into obsolescence. Here's what you need as a leader. You need the splashy dreams people to come up with a new thing, and the optimizers to make it better and better and better and better until its time has come to go. Then the dreamers come up with a new thing, the optimizers make it better and better and better, let go, and come up with a new thing. And done like that over time, you remain relentlessly relevant in your market. But it is a leadership issue because these two groups do not get along. You have to draw the best out of them. You have to honor the work that they do and get them to let go when the time has come. Final thing that goes wrong with our thinking, number 9, and it's so human, it's so easy, it's so understandable. We get too busy, we get too automated, we become too specialized to actually think. We're busy. We've got our hands in the machinery of what we do. We don't have time to zoom back and say, are we doing a unified thing? Are we all accomplishing the same thing? Are there better, more intelligent ways to do it? Are there old rules we should get rid of? And I hope that that's something that I can bring with a presentation like this. Your chance to zoom back and say, is there something here we should try? So let's get to the how-to. That's what goes wrong. What do you do to actually change it? Are there ways of fixing this and doing it intelligently? We don't want anarchy, we want productivity. That's what we're after. Here's your first solution, the most obvious one. You take a look at your scenario and you ask, which rules are people already trying to break? That will indicate for you where the bottlenecks are. And you can do it in two ways. You can do it internally and externally. So, internally, your own people keep repeating a behavior that bothers you. They keep trying to shortcut the system in some way. Why? Is it because they're unethical? Okay, well that's not acceptable. But is it because they're trying to do something? There is an outcome that they need. They're trying to serve a client or a customer in a way that our own systems do not allow for. Our own rules are getting in the way of the goals. Is it that this is different to what we've seen before? This vented foam does not comply with the rule book. If so, they're your rules. Can you get them out of the way? You can also do it externally. Which shortcuts are your clients or the people that you interact with externally trying to take? What systems or parts of your process do they not honor? Are they trying to teach you that it's too hard to do business with you? That we're making it too difficult, too expensive, too slow, too bureaucratic? Can it be simplified? I'll show you a way to simplify in just a moment as well. So the heart and soul of the thing is to take a look at which rules people are already trying to break. This was brought home to me in such a simple way. Growing up in South Africa, I used to think that U-turns were illegal globally. You're not allowed to do them in South Africa, it's against the law. Then I took a trip to California and I saw that you're allowed to do a U-turn. They've made provision for it. It was mind-blowing. That was the beginning of realizing rules are a man-made imposition. You can change them. If turning around is useful, enable it. There are always clever ways of doing that. The next thing you can do, petition the owner of the rules. Which rules get in your way? What's slowing you down? What's too costly, expensive, or silly? Who owns those rules? Folks, we are a small island. I do not for 1 second believe that we cannot bring pressure to bear if it's done well, ethically, and intelligently. I think we can change things here. I think we are exactly the kind of place that can do this with agility. Credit to the French government. They have a great example of this one. So, there was a flood in a Southeast Asian company, and the rescue response team wants to get there as fast as they can. Typically, they have to have a series of permits for all of their equipment, their life-saving gear, and so on. They contact the French government and say, we don't have time. Can you just move those rules out of the way wholesale and just let us through? And the French government said, oui, and off they went. And I think that's ingenious. Who owns the rules? Can we petition them simply to brush them aside or to suspend them where it's useful? Just to reduce them, if that would help. Next thing that we can do is to tell a consistent story. The last time I delivered my rule-breaking presentation, a gentleman told me about his son, a farmer, who had 2 different government departments. The one government department was coming to him and saying, we need more productivity, and therefore this is how we want to help you, this is what we'd like you to do the following. And he gets geared up and he starts getting going, and another department comes and visits him and goes, what are you doing? You're not allowed to do that. So one group is incentivizing him, the other group is trying to shut him down and tell him it's illegal what you're doing. Now, the story you tell yourself about who you are determines your behavior. We need a consistent story in Jersey. Are we after productivity? If we are, we cannot have petty rules. We need them out of the way. Are we a place of petty rules? In that case, we cannot have productivity. We have to choose. What is the story we tell ourselves about ourselves? Doesn't mean you can't have any rules, doesn't mean you have to have anarchy. It just means we have to do this intelligently. And you need these departments singing from the same hymn sheet. The next one, and this again came from this gentleman who told me about growing up in Jersey. And I asked him, why does this happen? He says, here's another dynamic. He says, imagine, for example, you try to get rid of rules in your immediate scenario. And he says, here's an example off the top of my head. He says, say you're the fire warden, and you know which rules save lives. You've been doing this all your life. You know that these ones are sensible, they're clever, they help. But you also know about all the theatrical ones that have been added on top. You also know about all the ones that prop up positions of power and are incentivized by salary. The things that don't need to be there, the stuff on top. And you decide, all right, I'm going to try and get rid of this. He says, you know what will happen? The next day, there'll be a headline on the paper, Fire Marshal wants us all dead. Okay, that's a problem. So, I've been wondering how you go about solving that problem. If each individual who stands up wanting to do this then ends up taking flank. The best I can come up